It's Jordan Mulligan from the Mulligan Brothers, and today's interview is with author of 13 Things Mentally Strong People Don't Do, Amy Morin. And Amy has kindly shared some more of her story. We flew all the way to Florida to go film this with Amy, and she kindly graced us with all of her time. And we filmed this beautiful interview where Amy shares more about her life, her story, her book, being an author, therapy. So this is a really, really interesting one for me. Something that Amy doesn't realize is how much she's helped me myself with grief, and that is why I love speaking to Amy and consuming all her content. Today's video was made possible by our sponsors, audible.com, where you can buy Amy's book, link down below, for free on audible.com. You can sign up with a free trial and try out Amy's book and see what you think, and also try Audible for a free month. Also sponsored by mulliganbrothers.com, as always, where you can buy the merchandise, all linked down below, which helps support us do this. Guys, please drop a comment, a like, and a subscribe button. Hit all those things for the algorithm. Before that, let's jump into this interview with the wonderful Amy Morin. So what I would like to do, Amy, is have you explain how you got into therapy. Like from childhood, is there any way of looking back and connecting dots?
When I was a kid, actually, I wanted to be a doctor. I was a pre-med major up until my first day of college, and then we had to dissect cats. And everybody else was really excited about it, except for me. And I realized I actually didn't want to be a doctor. I just loved the idea of being a doctor. So I thought, I want to help people, but I don't really necessarily want to do surgery on them. So I thought therapy was the next best option. Is, okay, how am I going to help people, but I'll focus on the mind. We'll do everything from the neck up. And decided then that that's what I wanted to do, fell in love with it, and decided to go to grad school and pursue a career as a therapist.
And how would you describe that to somebody who doesn't know what therapy is? It's psychotherapy, right? How would you describe that?
Some people think it's about solving people's problems or that we give them advice, but really it's about helping people better understand themselves. So they come in, sometimes they have a problem, a specific problem, like they're struggling with depression or they might have anxiety. Sometimes people are like, I feel like things that happened to me in my childhood affect me. I'm not reaching my greatest potential. What do I do? So it's really about having these conversations that help people see themselves a little bit differently. One of the big things we do in therapy is figure out what kind of beliefs somebody has. When they were a kid, maybe they thought they weren't good enough, and as an adult, they still hold on to that belief, and it plays out in all sorts of different areas of their lives. Or sometimes people will see themselves in a certain way, but then their behavior is different. And maybe we might point that out, kind of like a mirror, to say, hey, I hear you saying this, but this is the kind of behavior that I see. How do you make sense of that? Or at other times, people have a really specific goal. They come in and they say, I want to quit drinking, or I want to improve my marriage. What do I do about it? We come up with ideas, strategies, homework. People go home and they try those things, report back next week. But it's really about treating them like they're the expert on saying, how are we going to fix whatever's going on in your life? But it's up to you to decide what you want to try.
Is it a thing that people need different approaches and different types of therapy, or does everyone need the kind of same thing, like a broad stroke?
Oh, that's a good question. So therapy, I don't think everybody needs therapy. I don't think we should say everybody has a therapist and you keep seeing a therapist for life, because I don't think it's necessarily helpful over the long term if people always see a therapist. Sometimes we need it for short term, sometimes we need it in different times in our lives. But the number one factor of whether or not people get better is their relationship with the therapist. It really doesn't matter as much whether the therapist, what kind of techniques they use or strategies. It's all about whether somebody trusts their therapist enough to open up, and that they can receive that feedback, and that they feel like they have an open, honest, therapeutic relationship with the person.
And in a client therapy relationship, is it that you are trying to reach that goal that they have? And do you need to eventually tie that relationship off?
Right. It's a strange position because we're working ourselves out of a job. And so you get people to come in, they trust you, and then at some point, and then you say goodbye. And that's really tough to do, because sometimes people were like, yeah, but I come in and I see you once a week. That's more than I might see my friends and my family. Or I've been talking to you about things I've never talked to anybody else about before. So it's really a tough thing. But we practice then, how do you make it a healthy connection that maybe comes to an end? There are people that will sometimes come and see me for 6 months, and then 3 years later, they come back for another 6 months, and they come back and forth, which is wonderful. And other people, I'm just in their lives for a little bit, and I never know the end of their story either.
And with your own journey as a therapist, I wouldn't call it a straightforward journey. What was that like for you?
Oh, yeah, well, I started out as a therapist in rural Maine, in a small town, working with mostly kids at first, and thinking, okay, I learned all this stuff about mental strength in college. Here we go. But when I was 23, which is about a year into my work as a therapist, my mom passed away. And losing her just really reminded me of, okay, I know this stuff intellectually. These are the things I'm teaching people, but to go through all of that pain on a personal level opened my eyes to a lot of things I didn't know before, and to figure out, well, what am I tempted to do when I'm in pain or when I'm struggling? And started studying the people in my therapy office a lot to say, well, how come some people come in and maybe they've been through really hard times and they get stuck, but other people will come in and they've been through tough times, but they're optimistic, they're still trying to build a life. So I learned hopefully as much from them as I was giving to them, and was glad that I did. 3 years after my mom died, my 26-year-old husband died of a heart attack. Obviously at 26, you're not supposed to have a heart attack, and I never imagined I'd be widowed at 26. And then had to figure out, now how do I help other people deal with their problems when my own heart is broken? And it took a long time. It took years, I guess, for me to really feel like I was working on my own issues, which is a strange place to be, to say, here I am with a broken heart, trying to fix all of these unhealed emotional wounds in my own life, and yet I'm supposed to be helping other people at the same time.
What was there a disconnect at the start? You had the tools and you'd been teaching people therapy and you'd been delivering therapy for people, but was there a disconnect in you know what to do, but you're not implementing it into your own life?
Yeah, there's a big difference between knowing something and doing it. And so despite the fact that I knew, okay, when you're really, really sad, this is what you can do to help, or when you're grieving, our tendency is to go around it. Grief is horrible, it's awful. It affects everything from how you sleep to eating to interacting with people. Life is really, really tough when you're in the midst of grief. So our tendency is to go around it. I wanted to do the same thing. I wanted to distract myself. I just wanted to bury myself in the sand. I wanted to run away at the same time and then think, but I don't ever want my life to change. But everything was changing around me all at once. So I really had to say, okay, you know these things you're supposed to do, or there's certain things that you tell other people not to do. Now, how do you put them into play? How are you going to make this happen in life? And it took a lot of soul searching and a lot of hard work to get there.
The last time we spoke, I did mention that throughout my own life, I'd been through a lot of grief. And I also might have said that recently as well. I'm in therapy as well because of that. But more recently, more grief has come up, and it's because I didn't handle it very well. I didn't deal with it very well. And I'm just wondering, for people who are going through grief, for people who are experiencing grief, what should they be doing? What shouldn't they be doing? What should they be avoiding? How should somebody deal with grief?
Initially there are a lot of, if it's a loved one that you lost, and you have to do a lot of practical things, like you have to figure out what to do with their stuff, and you have to figure out, how to cancel their cell phone plan. There's so many things that we feel like, okay, you have to be on autopilot for a little while sometimes. And that makes sense because you have to go through these things that are really hard to do. But then at some point you figure out, well, how do I now deal with this pain? And we don't talk much about grief. And as a society, it's not really discussed. And other people don't know what to do. Even to this day, I struggle when somebody says they've lost someone. What do you say? I'm sorry. And then it doesn't feel like enough. And people will try to cheer you up, and they'll try to be kind. And people sometimes say things that come across as quite insensitive, even though they don't mean them to be. And then sometimes people just want you to be happy, so they try to drag you out of the house to go do something fun and tell you that it's okay, you should be happy. And the truth is, whatever you feel is okay. If you feel guilty one minute and happy the next, that's normal. Grief tends to come in waves where you can tolerate it for a little while, and then you might have a moment of happiness, and then you feel guilty for being happy, and then you're sad, and then you're angry, and then different times of the year bring up different experiences for us too, whether it's a holiday or a vacation and somebody's not there, those happy moments when you want to call that person and you can't. So I think it's really about just honoring all of those things and not putting a timeline on it. We talk about stages of grief, which then sends people into this notion that you should have these really neat stages that you go through, and that when you're done with one, you go to the next. That's not how it happens. It's 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and that you don't necessarily go through all of these stages, or you don't go through them in any specific order. It's just kind of the human experience. And I wish we talked more about it and that we felt more comfortable talking to friends and family and other people about what we're going through. But so often we feel guilty or we don't want to make somebody else feel sad, so we don't bring it up. And then we don't know what to do. And a lot of people just end up suffering in silence.
So I found for myself, and I know a lot of people find this, that when going through grief, sometimes it's just easier to avoid it, bury it, not deal with it per se, completely avoid the situation and just sort of put it to the back of the mind and carry on working hard and carrying on with life. What is the importance of taking a look at it and saying, right, I'm going to deal with this. I'm going to deal with how I really feel about it, look into how I feel sad about it. Is there an importance, or could we just get away with avoiding it our whole lives?
Yeah, grief is a process by which we heal, but suppressing it does work in the short term. When we shove it down, ignore it, pretend like, okay, that part of my life doesn't exist, or pretend it never happened, usually gets us through for a little while. But then it crops up in sometimes unexpected ways. People get physically ill, people struggle with their relationships, and maybe they don't know why, or they start having problems at work about something completely unrelated, but it's really not unrelated. It is related to this sadness that you've just pretended wasn't there. So it's super important to make sure that we take care of it. Our emotional wounds are like our physical wounds, where you want to address it, but it is easier to ignore it in the short term, or to pretend like nothing bothers you or that something's not going on. But it does come back to haunt us. And I think the more that we suppress it or pretend it's not there, the more it actually controls us, which is the opposite of what we're trying to do. We're trying to break free, but until you address it, you don't actually break free.
Throughout a lot of your work, you talk about having awareness and having awareness when going through grief. And for me, when you're burying it, you don't have a lot of awareness. And I realize awareness is so important. But somebody who is asking the question about awareness probably is having a lot of introspective looks. But somebody who's avoiding the situation, they are not reaching a place of awareness. They're probably never going to reach a place of awareness. Like, what is the importance, and how does somebody reach that point where they start to look inside and introspectively?
Sometimes that's where therapy comes in, to have an objective person who doesn't know you in your personal life to be able to say, actually, this is what I see. You're telling me this, but I see something different. Sometimes journaling helps. When people will start writing in a journal, they'll see over the course of a few weeks specific patterns about how they think or how they act. Or they'll suddenly start to realize, all these people in my life that treat me a certain way, what's the common denominator? Maybe it's me. So there are ways that we can raise our own awareness, but it's tough to do because, again, our brains see ourselves in a certain way. We see the world through our specific lens, and other people might see it differently. Sometimes you need feedback from other people.
So journaling has been a massive thing for myself. So I will take my journal and write down how I feel, how I thought for the day, if something made me emotional, if something came to my mind that I've remembered. It's been a huge part of my processing and has been really helpful. And sometimes it can seem quite daunting to get into journaling. Is there a way that people can simply get into journaling and start with journaling?
Now, that's a question people ask me a lot, because they'll look at a blank piece of paper and they're like, I don't know what to write down. I don't know how to get started. So sometimes people find it helpful to have a prompt, just a journal that maybe at the top of the page asks you something every day. Sometimes people find it helpful to just write down 3 things they're grateful for. Well, there are lots of different journals out there. I think whatever you find to be something that you'll stick to is important. Journaling doesn't necessarily have to be fun. Sometimes it's painful, it's hard to do, it's difficult, but if you stick to it, as you say, you notice patterns over time. So, and one thing you don't want to do is to just keep rehashing things in your journal over and over again, because just like it sometimes stays stuck in our brain, sometimes we just keep replaying awful things in our journals over and over, and that's not helpful. So you might write about what you learned from a bad experience. You might write about what you were thinking, what you were feeling, but then also, where do you go from here? How do you make things better going down the road? It might be something that you can't control, but what can you control is always yourself. So then how do you, moving forward, what are you going to do differently?
If you're in therapy and you're in that part where you are replaying, like you just said, you're stuck in a cycle, how does somebody break out of that?
And normally I find when people get really stuck, it's often because we're trying to control things that we can't control. So whether it's that somebody says, I wish my partner would act differently, and they come in to complain about their partner every week, but their partner's not here, it's them who's here. So we talk about, how do you change yourself? What can you do differently? Or it's just that sometimes writing things down and seeing it on a piece of paper helps you be like, oh, every Friday night I get sad. Every Saturday I go off the rails and make these horrible choices. And by Monday I feel guilty. And just sometimes just seeing that on paper helps you identify what's the triggers, what kinds of things are setting you off, where are you getting stuck, what kind of bad choices are you making, to have a goal. What do you want to do differently next time?
So I saw on Instagram that you put about trusting your body's reaction to stuff. So if somebody says something and it makes you feel a certain emotion, like maybe feeling that and think, why did I feel that way? Was it me? Was it them? What was said? And I think it's a fantastic thing. It goes back to awareness again, like talking about awareness. But how do we trust in our body's reaction? Like, how do we utilize that more? And also just more information on that.
Yeah, sometimes it's hard to know what to do in a situation, or if somebody's telling you something and something feels a little bit off, our brains will second guess it. Like, no, this is good, or it's fine, or you should keep going anyway. And we talk about like a gut reaction or something like that, but then people will be like, no, that's just self-doubt creeping in. Well, one really easy way sometimes to know when you've gotten yourself in a bad situation or when something's not right is your body reacts. Your heart's going to beat faster, your palms get sweaty. Maybe your face feels like it's getting hot. You figure it out. Your body doesn't lie. Sometimes your brain will. It will try to convince you that you're doing fine when you're doing something you shouldn't be doing, or it will tell you, no, this person's a good person. Your body knows the red flags and your body will react. So sometimes just tuning into that, being like, oh, why am I reacting like this? Why is my body doing this right now? It can give you some insight into what's going on around you.
So yeah, one thing I've not covered is 13 Things Mentally Strong People Don't Do is your book. And just the title of that, 13 Things Mentally Strong People Do, is what you would expect in a title of a book, but this is the exclusion of that. So it's 13 Things Mentally Strong People Don't Do. Yeah, please explain some more on that.
And as a therapist, I was told I should focus on what people are doing well and then tell them to keep doing more of that. So if somebody comes into my office and says, I wrote my gratitude journal twice this week, I should be like, wow, that's amazing. Let's keep doing that. But I thought at some point I'm doing them a disservice if I don't point out, okay, well, you wrote in your gratitude journal twice, but you spent the rest of the week binge eating and watching TV and not doing anything to make your life better. Writing in their gratitude journal doesn't necessarily outweigh all their bad habits. Because I thought, if I were to go see a physical trainer and they told me to run on a treadmill, great, I'd do that. But what if they didn't tell me to quit eating junk food? Well, then I'd be mad after a while because I didn't see any progress. So when it came to learning about mental strength and figuring out what makes some people stronger than others, I just realized there's so many bad habits. And when we have a bad habit, we get stuck in this hamster wheel and our good habits just don't really propel us forward. And the more that I started thinking about that and noticing that in my clients, the more I thought, if you just cut out this one habit, you can work smarter and not just harder. So say people who felt sorry for themselves, even if they wrote in a gratitude journal twice a week, but they spent the whole week feeling sorry for themselves, well, that didn't outweigh the fact that they were just having a pity party the rest of the time. But if you get rid of that, then writing in a gratitude journal works really well. So, and I'm a fan of saying, let's work smarter, not just harder. But I was seeing these people who were exhausted with good habits. They had self-help books piled to the ceiling and they knew all the things they should be doing, but they couldn't figure out why none of it was working. And sometimes it was just these little habits. Once they got rid of those things, they're like, oh yeah, all this other stuff in my life actually works. I just have to get rid of the stuff that was holding me back.
Is it that you find people, is it that people need to have reached a rock bottom to come seek help? I find when I look at the situations and see people going through stuff, a lot of the time they've had to reach rock bottom to then seek help.
Yeah, one of the number one questions I get is, how do I help somebody else, maybe who doesn't realize that they need help? And you can't force somebody to change if they don't want to. You can change your own behavior. But it's tough. I think the hardest part about changing your life is taking that first step and admitting that, okay, I need some help, or I need to, whether it's reach out to a therapist or start reading a self-help book, but just acknowledging that you want to change. But I always have hope for everybody. Sometimes the people who maybe get sent to therapy because they have to be there, it might be that they got in some legal trouble and somebody else is saying that they have to come to therapy, or maybe they did something at work and part of their work program says you now have to take an anger management class. So they come in the first few weeks and they're like, I really don't need to be here. But you'll sometimes see a change in them. Maybe week 5, something clicks and they say, all right, maybe I don't need to be here, but since I'm here anyway, I'm going to work on something. So I always have hope that people will hopefully get something out of whether it's a book or going to therapy. They may not change at the pace that we want them to. They might not change their habits in a way that we think that they should, but maybe that's just where they are right now.
Just the process of seeking a therapist for me was, going through loads of different therapists, finding a right fit. What's your advice for somebody trying to find a therapist?
Since we know that the fit between you and the therapist is super important, I always encourage people to, before you start reaching out, is to just think about what kind of person do you imagine you'd open yourself up to the most. Maybe it's like a grandmotherly figure, an older woman is somebody you would talk to, or maybe you want to talk to somebody your own age, or maybe you think, I've always been able to talk to men but not women, or vice versa. When you have that thought in your mind of who could I talk to the most, then I think then it just opens up the door to you then expanding your mind into who do you want to talk to, who could you visualize yourself sitting down and discussing private matters with. And then you might go to an online therapy directory. Places like Psychology Today list tons of therapists. Whether you want to see somebody online or in person, you can usually find somebody. And then you look at, well, what is it I want to go to therapy for? Whether it's depression, anxiety, a substance abuse problem, find somebody that has some expertise in that. One thing you can usually do with therapists too is to call them up. Most of them will give you a free 10 or 15 minutes on the phone where you can ask them some questions like, how do you normally work with people? Maybe you give them the quick 2 sentences of what you're going through and say, for somebody like me, have you seen success? Usually in a quick call, you won't necessarily know if this is definitely the therapist for you, but you might be able to rule out some that you might not be a good fit with. But you also might have some that you think, I could imagine talking to this person, and it sparks your interest, and then you decide to call them back or you set up an appointment. And just because you see somebody once doesn't mean you have to see that person for your whole life, but you might meet with them and you think, I feel really heard. I think this is somebody I could talk to. Or you might go in and think, yeah, this just probably isn't the person I'm going to open up to. And that's okay. Find somebody else.
So this one's really interesting to me. This was on your Instagram again. It was staying mentally strong in tough times, which is obviously when you would want to be mentally strong. But yeah, it's super interesting to me.
I see some people who think, okay, something horrible happened and I got to build some mental strength right now. Well, it's obviously not the time you want to build it. If you needed physical strength to lift a heavy box, doing some weightlifting 10 minutes before isn't going to do you any good. But that doesn't mean that there aren't things that you can't do right in the moment. Because so often when we feel like the world is crumbling or something awful is happening, we start to think, I can't handle this, I can't get through this. Well, research will show the number one thing that you could do to get yourself through a tough time is to think about another tough time that you went through before. Just remembering, I went through this other thing once. How'd you do it? Well, I had to rely on myself, or I took some breaks. I took a week off from work, or I just kept thinking to myself, I can do this, and then I did it. Whatever it is, but it can help remind you that in tough times, you have inner strength that you don't even remember that you have. And I guarantee there's times that all of us have been through something that we didn't think we could get through, yet we somehow did it. And just reminding yourself, yeah, it's like you have some sort of inner superhero that does come out when you need it the most. And just because you don't feel like it right now doesn't mean you can't do it.
What leads us to forget that? What leads us to forget that we've been through tough times and survived? What is it that we don't remember that we've been through these difficult times and use that as strength?
Our brains work really hard to keep our lives as simple, as easy as possible. So when we start to see something that looks like it's going to be tough, our brain's all, whoa, 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 don't do that. And then when we go through tough times that we can't control, when horrible things happen, our brains just are like, no, you can't do this. This hurts too much. It's just a protective mechanism because your brain doesn't want you to have any sort of physical or emotional hurt. So it's trying to protect you by saying, you can't do this. This isn't going to work out. And it wants you to do everything you can to stay safe. But the reality is sometimes we don't have a choice. We go through something awful and you have to keep going anyway.
Strategies to become mentally stronger.
So mental strength is all about the way you think, feel, and behave. So there's lots of things you can do to improve the way that you think. Because again, our brains lie to us. It will tell you that you can't do something that you can. So sometimes it's about proving your brain wrong. I like to go running every day. And when I do, my brain, I do a timed mile. 3/4 in, my brain always says, you can't possibly finish this race. So I always try to step it up at that moment to prove to my brain, no, I can run faster than you think. You underestimate me. And sometimes it's about just testing some of our beliefs. When we think we aren't good enough, we can't possibly do something, step back and say, what's the evidence? And you can train your brain to think differently over time. And then the second part's about our emotions. Sometimes we think I can't handle being sad, or anxiety is intolerable, and we start making really unhealthy choices when those feelings crop up. So it's about learning new coping strategies. It's about tolerating our emotions when we can, about knowing though that we don't have to just let ourselves feel whatever it is we feel when it's not serving us well. If you're so sad you can't get out of bed for 3 weeks, you might have to push yourself to get up. And it's about knowing the difference between that sometimes it's about caring for yourself, but sometimes it's about pushing yourself. And then it's about the action that we take. If you're tired one day and you think, oh, I don't feel like going to the gym, sometimes you got to push yourself to do it anyway. Or sometimes you got to make that phone call that you don't want to make, or you got to get up there and give that speech, even though you feel really nervous. And then knowing, okay, well, I'm mentally strong enough to do these things, even though I don't always feel like it, or I don't always think I am, or I don't always make the right choice. Plenty of choices moving forward. And when we do that, we just give ourselves more confidence to know, okay, I'm ready. I can handle whatever life's going to throw my way.
Becoming mentally strong, I think you have things that happen to you and things that you decide to do. And in life, things happen to everybody. It's almost inevitable to go through life without something really tough happening, whether it's illness or the death of a loved one. Naturally, that happens at the end of life, but we do usually find that people will go through it throughout their lives. Is there an importance on, if we don't have that, something tough happen to us, is there importance of seeking tough situations to test ourselves, whether it's getting up early in the morning or going for a run for the mile, or is there importance of testing ourselves and putting ourselves through tough situations?
It's important to do hard things in general. So to challenge ourselves sometimes to do something that we didn't think we could can help us see, okay, maybe I'm more capable, maybe I'm more competent than I thought that I was. But I'm not a fan of saying that we should just toughen ourselves up for no real reason, or that we have to be exposed to awful things. We have this idea sometimes that what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. That's not actually true. A lot of people are traumatized by horrible things that happen to them, and they don't necessarily emerge stronger. They come out kind of scarred and they struggle in life, and that's okay. And that's what can happen to us when we do go through traumatic circumstances. So I don't think that you have to go through awful things in order to be a strong person, but that you can challenge yourself every day. And what's a challenge for me isn't going to be the same thing that's a challenge for you. I might find heights are incredibly terrifying, but you might find that speaking in front of a crowd is terrifying, or vice versa. So it's about knowing what kinds of things are scary for me, what areas of my life do I want to challenge myself, and what can I learn from those challenges.
So there was a news story that I saw of yourself where you were stood by the docks, and you looked very happy, successful, you'd had your book come out, and they asked you a question sort of in regards to how you got here, and you talk about sort of the death of the loved ones and the death of your husband, and it reminds me of like that there was the other side of this, the dark side, the difficult side for yourself, for the grief. Was there a point when you was in that grief, when you was in that dark place, where you couldn't see the light, you couldn't see yourself sitting on the edge of the dock with the boat and smiling? Was there ever a point like that for you?
Yeah. After I lost my mom, and then it was 3 years to the day after I lost my mom that I lost my husband. And it took years to feel like, okay, I'm going to rebuild my life. And I did. I got remarried. I got a new house. I got a new job, and life was looking pretty good. And then shortly after that, my father-in-law got diagnosed with terminal cancer. And it was in that moment that I just thought, you know, I've grieved for 10 years. I don't want to grieve any longer. I couldn't imagine losing one more person. And I felt like in that moment, like, well, what's the purpose? You know, you go out there and you do the best you can, you build the best life you can, and boom, boom, boom. If you keep losing people, it's awful. And I just, in that moment, I just couldn't imagine like getting through it. It just felt like, what's next? Or how could I possibly keep losing my loved ones? But then it was also in that moment that I wrote a list of what mentally strong people don't do. And it was a letter to myself about how to get through the next few days, really, is what I was looking at. Because when I lost my mom and my husband, it was sudden and unexpected, but losing my father-in-law, we knew it was coming. And I thought, how do you prepare yourself for this? How do you get through it? And so I would read over this letter, and it was just, hey, don't do these things today, and you'll get through it. As long as you don't do these certain things, you'll be fine. And I found that letter to be helpful. So I published the letter on the internet, thinking 3 or 4 people might read it, hoped it would help somebody, but 50 million people read the list. And then I got to write a book about it. And here I am all these years later, still talking about mental strength. I never imagined what was around that next corner. I could really only imagine that things were going to keep getting worse. And we lost my father-in-law shortly after I wrote that letter. And I was still filled with grief, but it was just one of those times in life to remember that even though really bad things happen, something really unexpected that's a wonderful thing could be right around the corner too. And you just never know what's around the corner until you keep going.
It was such a traumatic experience and tough time to go through, and you've been through some awful times. And then on the other side of it, your story that you've shared in your book and your work has helped millions of people. And I just wonder, is there something to that for yourself, that this tragedy and these difficult times for you and horrendous times for yourself at the time as well have helped millions of people through the work?
Yeah, it's amazing to think that my story has helped people. As a therapist, I was always used to hearing people's stories. I never shared my own. So even when my original list of the 13 things mentally strong people don't do went viral, nobody knew why I wrote it. I really had no plans of telling anybody. And it was my friends that said, "You think you should tell the backstory?" And I remember saying, no, like, I'm a therapist. I'm not gonna burden anybody with my personal issues. I'm just gonna put that out there and walk away. And they really convinced me, like, no, you have a story behind it. You should share your story, and which is words I always tell my clients as well. So I thought, okay, let's see what happens. And so it's been an honor now to be able to share with people, okay, I'm not just saying these things because I'm a therapist, but I'm saying because this is what worked for me. And I'm glad I shared my story now to be able to say, it's not just about things I learned from a textbook. These are the things I went through in my own life, and they helped me. Maybe they can help you too.
If you are enjoying this video, head over to audible.com, where you can now get Amy's book for free. Yes, for free. 13 things mentally strong people don't do, for free, with the link down below. Do you see an importance of doing that kind of work? That, you know, a good friend of ours, Inky Johnson, motivational speaker, he always says that once you've gone through the adversity, reach back over the hill and help people over. Do you see an importance of that, of going through it, but then also once you're through it, helping other people get through a similar situation, or offering your advice and wisdom to help them through?
I do, because sometimes people will be like, oh, it's great you got to write a book. Good things happen even though you went through hard times, but it's not like it evens out. I mean, I have books, yes, and that's a really fun thing, but I'd much rather have my loved ones than books. But on the other hand, to be able to say, okay, I've been in the trenches, I know how awful things can be, and yeah, I'll definitely reach out and say, this is what helped me. Maybe it can help you. And that's been part of my healing process too, is when I get messages from people who say, gosh, I was really struggling and I read your book and it helped me, just to know, okay, I'm still have some meaning and some purpose, and I'm putting something out there that's helping other people, and hopefully my pain that I went through can somehow be helpful to somebody else.
So I mean, when I look at the book personally, the things that stand out for me is about dealing with grief and difficult times and becoming mentally strong in adversity. But the book itself is beneficial to entrepreneurs and businessmen and athletes, right?
Right. People will say, well, it's all about resilience, right? But I really see resilience as bouncing back from hard times, which is great. But what if we just braced ourselves our entire lives waiting for something horrible to happen? I don't think we should just make our lives about making sure that we somehow get through the next horrible thing that happens. That's not a very good way to live. But instead, it's about reaching your greatest potential, whether you are an athlete or a business person or a stay-at-home parent, whatever it is, to be able to say, I want to be able to think, feel, and do my best at whatever it is I'm doing. And yes, bad things are going to happen, but plenty of good things are going to happen too. And I want to feel like I can enjoy the good times too.
So I think you get clients who are coming in from reactive situations, like bad things have happened and they come in. But what are the sort of issues that people bring in when it's a non-reactive situation? It's somebody who is just coming in for therapy, not off the back of like grief or adversity, but they're coming in for therapy for help with something. What kind of stuff do they bring?
See, early on, it was a lot of people who would say, you know, something horrible's happened, or I have this awful thing going on in my life. And that was in part because insurance companies only paid for therapy if you were ill. We've come a long way, and figuring out, well, you know, what if you only went to the doctor when you were really, really sick? Well, you can prevent a lot of problems by going to the doctor when you feel okay. So now I think people really see therapy differently of, okay, maybe when you're doing okay in life, you can still use that as an opportunity to say, how can I feel even better? Or what kinds of things still might be holding me back that I don't recognize? So I think it's important to be able to put ourselves out there and not just think that therapy is for people who are broken or people who are really sick, but to know sometimes you can talk to a therapist, even when life's okay. And even if it's just a checkup to say, hey, this is what I have going on. Is there anything that you could see from your perspective that maybe I could work on or do differently? And even if it's just to get some peace of mind, if somebody says to you, you're doing a good job, sometimes that's pretty powerful too.
A lot of your work is shared on social media. It's how a lot of people find you. And it's for us, social media is such a positivity. It has such a positive impact. But then there is the flip side of it, the negative side of it. Is there a way that we can use social media and create it into a healthy space for ourselves?
Yeah, our smartphones in our pockets have the power to be amazing tools. Never before have we had something in our hands 24/7 that could help us build mental strength. You can have apps, you can have courses, you can take a meditation, something if you want, you can have something that helps you sleep, you can track your habits every day. I mean, amazing things. However, we know most of us tend to use it because we're just scrolling mindlessly through social media, which we know isn't good for our mental health, yet most of us still spend more time scrolling than we'd like to admit. And then whether we're comparing ourselves because we think everybody else is happy and healthy and lives a wonderful life, or we look at other people's social media accounts and we think, oh, why do they have so many friends and I don't? And then sometimes we just tend to look at our own lives and think, somehow I don't measure up, I'm not good enough. Or we feel like we should be doing more because we see these other people that seem to be doing amazing things and building these amazing businesses. And we think, how come I can't do that? So it certainly has the power to have a negative toll on our mental health. I think if we used it to actually connect with people and make plans with them, that would be great. But so often it becomes a substitute. Instead of spending time with our friends, we just end up using Instagram to communicate with a handful of people. And then we don't go, it takes up the time that we would have spent seeing our friends in person.
So we talk about being with people and spending time with people. I'm interested to hear your thoughts on spending time by yourself and like removing social media and the phone from the situation, really sitting with yourself. I know for me, it really created a lot of awareness when I got that time to myself. Is there an importance to, be by yourself and sit with yourself?
It is. So we're social creatures, so it's important to be around our friends and family and to be out there. But on the other hand, sometimes we're so bombarded with our social media and our phones are going off all the time, and we're never actually alone with our own thoughts. And just to give yourself a break sometimes, and to 15 minutes of solitude can go a long way toward helping your mental health. Just maybe you write in a journal, maybe you do just go for a walk, or you just sit and think. But when we talk about this in therapy, a lot of people are like, I have to be productive, or you don't know how busy I am, I don't have time for this. But really, it's so important to really just check in with yourself. How are you feeling? How are you doing? How are your goals? What do you want to do tomorrow? And taking just a few minutes for yourself is really important.
So you've spoken about, it's a quote that I've seen and you've said it before, is courage over confidence. And a lot of people think they're the same, but there's a difference between the two.
Right. Sometimes people will say, I need to get out there and do something. I need more confidence so I can go to college, or I need more confidence so I can have more friends. But I don't have any magic wands that would give anybody confidence. Sometimes you just have to act brave to feel brave. So how do you be courageous? Well, maybe it's signing up for a class, knowing that maybe you're going to fail, and that's okay. Or you put yourself out there, invite somebody for coffee, knowing that they might say no, but that you can handle it anyway. So often I hear people when they talk about mental strength thinking it's about assuming you're always going to win and that things are always going to go well. Or if you sign up for that class and you think there's a chance you won't fail, then you're going to. Or that if you think that there's a chance you're going to fail at something, then you're letting that possibility into your life. The truth is we can all fail at something, but knowing I can tolerate failure, it's not the end of the world, that's okay, and I can keep going anyway, I think that's true mental strength.
Failure is something that we all avoid, and my old basketball coach used to say that the lesson is in the failure. So at the point of where you fail and pushing yourself to the point of where you fail is where the lesson would be. And he always used to say that. And I think we avoid failure so much we don't get close to that learning. Is it something that we should be seeking? Is it something that we should be avoiding? Just more on what you think about failure.
Yeah, I think there's both ends of the spectrum. Sometimes I hear people say, like, I'm going to fail my way up the ladder, and they're really like almost seeking failure, or they're trying to get so far ahead before they're even there. They haven't gone through the steps, but it's almost like then they think that that's a badge of honor. But on the other hand, how many of us haven't sometimes bragged because we haven't failed at something for a while? Well, it's probably not anything to brag about either. It's really about knowing that, yeah, if you're putting yourself out there, it means you will fail. And that's okay. It just means you're pushing yourself to the limits and that you're trying things you haven't tried before, and they're all learning opportunities.
So on the flip side of failure, what is the effect of winning and the feedback loop from winning and the positive effects of receiving that positive feedback?
Of course, when we accomplish something, we feel good, but sometimes we get kind of addicted to the accomplishment idea too, or we're only in it for the medal or for winning at the end. And because of that, we just become so focused on that we miss the journey along the way. I could easily be one of those people who thinks it's all about the end goal and to forget to enjoy the journey along the way. And I think, at the end of life, there's no medal for being the richest, kindest, or whatever else we think that there's a medal for at the end of life. So I like to live life backwards too, is to say, well, what's really important? And yeah, it'd be great to win or to get this medal, but on the other hand, what's more important along the way? How do I want to show up, and what can I learn from my effort rather than just the end result? Because so often we can't control the end result. I'll have people that come into my therapy office and they're like, I have to get this promotion. Well, you don't know who they're going to hire. Maybe you do a great job in the interview, but they hire somebody else anyway. Let's just focus on making sure you do the best you can in the interview that you have. That's a better thing to focus on than thinking that you have to definitely get the promotion.
How do we get invested in loving and enjoying the journey over the end result? I'm guilty myself of visioning the end result so much that I sort of miss the journey, and it's all flown past me, and we've ended up where we wanted to end up, but we've missed the whole journey, which was the fun part.
It's something I work on regularly too, because I just try to, I guess, remind myself to stop and look around sometimes and say, what am I learning today? How can I get a little bit better tomorrow? But what did I enjoy and appreciate about today? And what's this process look like? And to know that rather than just visualizing myself crossing the finish line or getting that gold medal at the end, it's about visualizing myself putting in the hard work along the way. So I think so often we just want to say, like, celebrate at the end, but we don't know how it's going to end. And if there's anything I've learned from my personal story too, it's that tomorrow's not guaranteed. So I hate to put off joy until I finally get to the end, because who knows what's going to happen tomorrow. So I try to take that and just remind myself, appreciate today, live the best life you can today, knowing that you're on this journey and there's no guarantee of what the finish line is or what's going to happen at the end.
I absolutely love that, the idea that tomorrow isn't promised. For me, that's a lesson that I've learned, and I just stand by it. I absolutely love that saying, but I know so many people struggle to embrace that because they fear death so much and they fear not living so much that they can't embrace the idea that time is precious. They would rather pretend that they're invincible and avoid the idea of death. How does somebody embrace that?
Yeah, I think it's easy to say, yeah, I'm working on this, and achievement almost just becomes a distraction from everyday life, because I'm not going to worry about all this other stuff because I'm just focused on this one thing that I want to do, and then I'll feel good about myself. But for people who live their lives like that, they usually find once they've achieved something, then they can't even enjoy it, because then they're just looking at the next thing that they're going to achieve, and then it becomes this pattern of constantly feeling like you're never good enough. And when you do have those brief moments where you achieve something, you just realize there's still somebody else ahead of you, or there's still a long way to go before you get to the next milestone. And part of that is experience, that once you've done that enough times, you figure out, gee, that this isn't what this life's about. And also just living our lives backwards. When you stop and think, if I live to be 100 years old and I look back over my life, what would make me proud? What would make me say I had a life that was worth living? And am I doing that now? And for a lot of us, I think our relationships are really important, friends, family, but then we look at how much time we actually spend on other stuff like work. And you think, well, what gets in the way? What is it that is really driving me? Or what kind of a life do I want to have? And how do I start to create it right now? Because again, what we create now is it's how we're going to live our lives tomorrow. Who are we going to spend our time with? How are we going to spend our money? What do we want to be doing with the time that we have left?
How do you trust that? How do you embrace that? Like, is it trusting that gut feeling again of like, this is what makes me feel happy and that's what I'm going to do today and this is what I'm going to do tomorrow?
I really think life should be about lots of experiments and figuring that out. Like how do I want to live my life? A lot of us get caught up in the daily grind of a job. You come home, you have enough time to eat dinner, watch a few minutes of TV, and you go to bed. And same thing happens day in and day out. And then we spend all this time like planning a vacation or you plan a wedding, but we don't really plan our lives. Like, how do you want to live? What kind of life do you want to have? And to be open to new experiences. And sometimes just doing something completely different makes you realize, well, I was in all of these habits. I lived this certain life when I was doing this thing, but now maybe that's not the kind of life I want to live. I'll use my life as an example. I was a therapist that worked the traditional 40-hour work week for a long, long time and lived in rural Maine. Well, now I live on a sailboat in the Florida Keys and I get to do lots of cool things. And I had to move away from a lot of the friends and family that I had, but it opened up new doors to me too, because now when I visit with friends and family, I get to spend, say, 10 days with them. I never did that. Even when we lived close, we never spent 10 days together at the same time. So now I get to see them in a different way. But I wouldn't have known that if I hadn't have just taken the leap, because for years I would have thought, I don't want to move away because I want to see my friends and family, but I'd see them for a few hours here, a few hours there, but never for this huge chunk of time that I get now. So in some ways it's made us closer. So I think just experimenting, different lifestyles, different strategies. What kind of a life do you want to live? Do you exercise in the morning or at night? It could be as simple sometimes as just changing up some of our habits to see what helps us do our best.
Yeah, I mean, that image of, clocking in for every single day of the week and, we get up in the morning, we go to work, we clock out, we go home, there's no enjoyment in there. It's funny that you say that. Is like, that is just exactly what all of us did at Mulligan Brothers. Luke, William, myself, like we all did that. And, we didn't have that enjoyment. And it's like I know some people who stop and look up and they've not enjoyed the journey and they go, how the hell did I get here? Like, how did I arrive here? It is really interesting.
Right. And I think it's because a lot of people will say, I was working really hard to pay my bills and I was getting the bills paid, but then I always needed a new car, I needed to upgrade, or we needed a bigger house. And then I felt like I needed to earn more money. And then at some point they say, well, why? Why do I need more money? Well, if I didn't have as much money, then maybe I wouldn't drive as nice a car. But how important is it to me to drive that nice car? Or maybe we wouldn't take as many exotic vacations, but what could we do with it instead? And at some point in our lives, I hope most of us start to really evaluate that time versus money question. Like, how important is money to me versus time? You need a certain amount of money to be able to enjoy your free time, and where that line is going to be a little different for any of us. But to know you can always make more money, but the one thing you can't ever make more of is going to be time.
With your experience so far, going through and experiencing life throughout the world, is like, what do you think life is about?
I feel like it's about learning and growing and then giving back, taking the experiences that we've had and figuring out how do you teach other people? How do you help other people figure out what they're going through, not in a preachy sort of a way where you get in their face and tell them they need to make changes, but how can you inspire people or motivate them through your own actions? How can you make sure that once your needs are met, how can you help other people who have unmet needs in their lives?
Why decide to help people? Like, is there something that's like attractive to you about helping somebody or making someone else's life better? Like, what was the reason that you chose to do helping people?
Yeah, it sounds, on the surface, it sounds like I'm going to help people because I think other people need my help. Reality, helping other people helps me just as much, which sounds cliche, but we know that from the research, that when we feel like we're needed, it's a really good thing. When we feel like we're part of a community, when we're working on goals, when we're doing something and we have a sense of belonging, that's really good for our mental health. Study after study will show that making more money doesn't necessarily improve your mental health, but it does, being part of a community where you feel like you have a sense of belonging.
Yeah, I mean, for us, we never knew why. We didn't have a why as to why we wanted to create motivational, inspirational videos. Like, if we couldn't make money out of it, we would have done a run-of-the-mill job to be able to fund doing this because it felt good. Like, helping people felt good, and it's like, that's a lovely feeling. That's what drives it, that helping somebody else feels nice. Even if it sounds selfish, it does feel nice to help somebody else. At the moment, where is the best place to find resources of Amy Morin? Like, what's the best direction you would point somebody in right now?
So right now, most of my time goes towards working on the Variable Mind podcast. So I get to interview people about mental strength and give out some of my own tips. I have a workbook coming out next year as a companion to the first book, because so many people were saying, I read your book, now I just need to know how else can I apply these things to my life, or I want more. So I have a workbook that's filled with mental strength exercises and strategies so that people can fill in the blanks. I ask reflective questions and people can say, okay, this is how I'm going to apply it to my life. And then after that, I'm going to figure out what the next book is after that.
As an author, you have goals obviously set that I'm going to finish this book, and it's like, how do you find to manage that, to not get too invested in those goals? Like, is there a way of balancing it all?
Yeah, so writing books is interesting. I'm fortunate that a lot of my readers ask questions that I just naturally love to answer. So I can answer some of them on the podcast. Some of them are bigger questions that I get to write a whole book about. And so I'm still excited about it. And as long as people keep buying my books and asking questions, it's still things that I want to do. Luckily, I write fast. After being a therapist for so many years, the stories and the same things that I was telling my therapy clients, I can put it on paper and it happens really fast, which makes the writing process, I wouldn't say fun all the time, because that's not true. There are days that is definitely not fun, but a lot of times it's a wonderful thing, and I thoroughly enjoy sitting and writing and making something actually come to life.
So there was this notion recently, not too long ago, that if you wanted to be successful in life, the journey had to suck, and it was supposed to be difficult and hard, and you weren't supposed to have any fun. And obviously now that's kind of changing a little bit, but like, how do you find and make sure that you do find fun in that journey of success, and you do find happiness along the way?
I think it's so important. We spend so many hours a week at work, no matter what you do. If you're an entrepreneur, you work at a company, whatever it is you do, you're going to spend a lot of time and energy doing it. And I think our attitude reflects greatly in what kind of work that we do too. I've had jobs in the past that I've absolutely hated, and I dreaded getting up on Monday morning. I dreaded going to work. That is absolutely no way to live. And I saw my parents not love the work that they do too, and it was more of a way to earn money to pay the bills rather than something that they were excited about going to every day. So the fact that I now live in a world where we can be excited, there's so many opportunities, and you can say, I'm going to choose how I spend my time and how I make my money, I think is an opportunity we should all try to take advantage of.
Is it a point of longevity, waking up most days happy to do what you do?
For me, yes. So I hated school as a kid. I woke up every day and I was sick, physically ill, because I hated Monday mornings. I hated school so much. And so I had promised myself when I was like 8 years old, if I become an adult, I'm never going to do something that I absolutely hate, Sunday night I'd start to get sick. So as an adult, I think, I'm here. I get to do that now. I get to find something of how I want to spend my time, and I get to do it in an enjoyable way. And I'll never take that for granted, ever.
Obviously, there are going to be tough days. It's not always going to be happy clappy. There will be the odd tough day. And I'm wondering, how do you deal with those days, in particular, those tougher days?
Yeah, so sometimes I just say it out loud. And if I hear myself talking, like, okay, if my biggest problem is I live on a sailboat in the Florida Keys, and right now I'm struggling because I have this deadline I have to meet or something. I'm like, okay, but my life's okay then. I think going through really, really tough times helps me keep things in perspective, and not to minimize. I still have days where I'm sad or days when life is rough. And I don't minimize my pain by saying, well, at least you're not still grieving the loss of everybody in your life. I don't want to minimize it, but on the other hand, I can keep it in perspective and say, well, all right, this is a rough day, but you're not 8 years old vomiting before school every day, so it's really not that bad. Or I remind myself too, sometimes it's just about taking back my power and saying, well, you have choices. If this isn't fun for you anymore, you don't want to do this, well, go do something else. And then I quickly realize I just really know where else I'd want to be, or something else I'd want to be doing. But just that reminder, if I'm really struggling, I can take a vacation. I can take a day off. I can go do something else for a little while. I could take 6 months off if I wanted. But ultimately, no, it's usually just a rough patch, and I can get through this.
So we talk about like trusting emotions and trusting ourselves. How do you know that the emotion that's coming through is coming from a good place?
We talk about emotions like they're good or they're bad. People will say like, well, anger is a bad emotion, but excitement is a good emotion. But then when you really think about it, like any feeling we have has the power to be helpful or hurtful at any given moment. So if you're sad for a day, maybe it helps you honor something that you lost. But if you're sad for 6 months and you can't get out of bed, it's going to become a problem in your life. Or when people say, I'm really excited about a vacation, that feels good. We want to be excited. But if somebody says, hey, I have this new business opportunity, you're going to get rich, and you just have to invest $1,000, If you're so excited about the fact that I just said you're going to get rich that you don't ask me any questions, well, then your emotions aren't helpful to you. And we don't really spend a lot of time talking about our feelings or identifying our emotions. We just tend to kind of go with them on a whim, or we don't really reflect, how might I be feeling today? So I think it's really important to check in with yourself. How do I feel? You might be anxious about something going on in your home life, and you show up at work and you have this new exciting work opportunity, but your anxiety from home spills over. There's research behind this that says you're going to say no to this work opportunity because you're anxious about something else altogether. But we don't pay enough attention to know, well, gee, why am I saying no to this? Well, I'm actually anxious because something happened with my mom yesterday, and now I'm kind of worried about that. Has nothing to do with what's right in front of you. So I think if we spend more time just focusing on, what do I feel right now? How's that emotion potentially affecting my choices and my behavior? We'd make a lot better decisions.
For us, we feel like there is a push sometimes, like, even though like it makes us happy and, we want to do this, but then some days when you don't want to do it, it's like there's almost like a push. There's a reason that we get out of bed, and you can't really pinpoint it, but it pushes you. Do you have that same feeling? Do you know like what is pushing you and what is driving you to get up early in those mornings to do that and to wake up and write?
So it's so important to have sort of a sense of meaning and purpose in life, so that even when we don't want to do something, as long as you know, well, there's meaning or purpose behind it. I might not want to help my friend move on Saturday because it's hot outside and I have better things to do, but the purpose is I want to be a good friend to this person. Or when I don't feel like sitting down and writing a book and editing it for the 15th time, well, I know there's a bigger meaning to it, that putting it out there in the world is going to be good for me, that it's an honor to be able to do it. So sometimes just stepping back and reminding ourselves of the why. Why is it important to do certain things even when we don't want to do it?
So if we were to send our viewers somewhere right now and send them to read your resources, what is the first piece of literature or resources that you would send them to?
I guess I would refer people to probably maybe listen to the podcast. For anybody that listens to shows, the Very Well Mind podcast, filled with exercises, strategies. We talk all things mental health and mental strength, and some of it's similar to the stuff in the books, but some of it is new content that we've created to put out there too, to deal with all the things going on in the world today.
And sorry, where can you find that?
So Very Well Mind podcast is Apple, Spotify, pretty much anywhere podcasts are, or the verywellmind.com website.
So it's accessible to all. It's obviously, it'll all be linked down below, but I think that's amazing that you do that. Where else can people find more resources?
So my website is Amy Morin, LCSW, as in licensed clinical social worker.com.
I find that an amazing resource. Your Instagram is actually amazing. Well, I mean, just explain to people, what kind of stuff happens on there?
Instagram, I try to share video clips from our podcast, give people a little insight into what we're talking about, but then also inspirational quotes and strategies and tips and real life things that people can start to apply if they want to grow mentally stronger.
Thank you so much for your time today, Amy. I can't thank you enough for having us out here. Just really excited to get this piece in the editing room and check out what sort of content we can create. But yeah, we can't thank you enough. And yeah, everything that's been mentioned is going to be linked down below. And there you go, a wonderful interview with Amy Morin. I can't thank her enough. Honestly, for me, this past year, as I've said in the first interview, when I first started grieving again, I was speaking to Amy, quite funnily enough, and now I'm kind of coming out the other end of it and I've spoken to Amy again. So it's been wonderful for me. Thank you, Amy, for all your time. We hope to do some projects again in the future. If you want to support Amy, the link down below to audible.com will actually get you a free copy of 13 Things Mentally Strong People Don't Do with that link. So you can click that. You can also head over to Instagram, follow Amy, and see her resources on there, which is all for free as well. And if you want to support Mulligan Brothers, please consider going to mulliganbrothers.com to buy the Inspire Change t-shirts like this one, and much, much more. The journals are also linked in there as well. The Not a journals are linked in there. And please go over to Instagram and follow me at Jordan Mulligan Brother. Say hello to myself, get a conversation going. And yeah, thank you for watching. Share the video, comment, like, and subscribe. Go and do those things. Actually, go and do those things for the algorithm. And share this video to help inspire change with more people. If you think this will help somebody, please go share it with them. That's what this whole movement is about. So support the movement by sharing the video to inspire change. Have a blessed and productive day. Hopefully I will see you in the next one. Peace.